Okay, hi everyone. We're going to go ahead and kick off this event. So thank you all so much for joining us. I'm Holly Krecka, Executive Director of the University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources. It's my honor to start this event. I think your agenda says that Temple Stollinger will be doing this, but I asked if I could do it so that I had the honor of introducing her. So welcome to the 2025 Landscape Discussion on Energy Law and Policy in the Rockies. This is the 11th year that this conference has happened, and I hope you had a chance to look at the agenda, which is truly an incredible agenda. I'm really excited about the day. To the School of Energy Resources, we're really honored to support this event and many others. If you're not familiar with the school, our mission is to advance energy-driven economic development for the state. And we do that through several different ways, through a very large, robust research program, which includes both technical and non-technical research. And the legal component of our research program is really vital to even, no matter how hard you work on developing a new technology, if the policy and regulatory framework isn't right, then it can't be deployed. And so it's such an important part of what we do, and it's really been growing in recent years. And thanks to incredible folks like Tara Rigetti, who I just saw a minute ago, she's around, there she is. Now, so she leads the a center called, or her research team called Jewel, which is jurisprudence in, I'm not gonna remember the thing, what is it? Underground Law and Energy, thank you. And then Matt Fry, who's here leading our Center for Energy Regulation and Policy Analysis. And our role at SER on the research side is really to harness all the incredible talent, both within the School of Energy Resources, across the University of Wyoming and beyond. We also have a very robust academic program that's been growing in recent years, and I see graduates and students. Thanks guys for coming. Incredible opportunity for you to be here and hear the speakers today. And our academic program, really our goal is to continue to work with units across the University of Wyoming so that every student at the university can take energy-related curriculum if they should so choose. And so we have our undergraduate degree, Energy Resource Management and Development, which has two concentrations, professional land management and energy and environmental systems. We also, in the last few years, have added an energy minor that really can be tailored to interests across the university. We have added a certificate on carbon capture, use, and storage. We've added a certificate on land administration, and our newest certificate, we've added both an undergraduate and a graduate certificate in nuclear energy science. And I think what can really set us apart with some of these credentials is that because it really starts with our research program, we have a really great perspective on what folks across the university are working on as it's related to energy and what they're teaching and what they're offering. And so that allows us to really incorporate classes across the university as opposed to from just one or two departments. And so I think we're doing some things that are really novel on the academic side. And finally, I'd like to highlight our third pillar of how we meet our mission, which is our outreach program. That takes a lot of different, it has a lot of different components. Of course, events like this one are part of that. Also, supporting the researchers to get their work out into Wyoming communities and beyond is a big part of that program as well. And so I just want to thank Christine Reed and Peyton Hayes for all their hard work in putting together this conference and all they do every day. Again, all these academics, outreach, and research have to tie together to really meet that mission. And like I already said, one of the most important things we do is collaboration. Because we are not, at the School of Energy Resources, we're not trying to build an island or a castle. Our job is to lift all boats across the University of Wyoming and beyond to deliver for the state. And so this conference is a great example. Like I said, it's the 11th time it's been done. And it is a collaboration between the University of Wyoming College of Law, the School of Energy Resources, and the Haub School of Environment and Natural Resources. And it's a great example of we have someone who is really dedicated to the state, has done so much to the state in Temple Stollinger, and that we can help her put this conference on. So with that, it is my honor to introduce Temple. She is a Wyoming Excellence Chair, and she holds a dual appointment in the Haub School and the UW College of Law, where she co-directs the Gina Guy Center for Land and Water Law. She also serves as an adjunct professor for the School of Energy Resources, woohoo, and leads the Haub School's JDMA program in Environment and Natural Resources. She teaches courses in wildlife law, public land law, environmental law, and national or NEPA. And we have a whole podcast, shameless plug. We have a podcast called Energy Frontier, the Wyoming Landscape. And if you want to hear more about NEPA from Temple, you can dial into that episode. Temple has researched a broad spectrum of environmental and natural resource law and policy issues, including wildlife conservation, endangered species protection and energy development, public and private land management and conservation, and she's just great to be able to work with her. So Temple, thank you all for all you do, and let's kick this off.
Thank you, Dr. Kreka, for that kind introduction. As some of you know, Holly recently announced that she's leaving the University of Wyoming to pursue an exciting new career. But the good news is, because that's pretty bad news, that she's staying right here in Laramie, which is a relief on so many fronts. For me personally, especially because her 8-year-old left-footed twins are key players on our Laramie United U9 girls soccer team. Holly, we're so grateful for your many years of leadership at the University of Wyoming and the School of Energy Resources. Under your guidance, the school has experienced a period of truly exceptional growth and innovation, advancing research, supporting students, and strengthening partnerships across the state and the region. You faithfully sat through this conference every single year since you became the director, a true testament to your commitment and endurance. And the fact that you've done so as a PhD chemical engineer and not a lawyer makes that even more impressive. Your leadership has left a remarkable legacy, and your work continues to shape both the University of Wyoming and the state of Wyoming for the better. Please join me in a round of applause thanking Holly for her outstanding leadership, her vision for the School of Energy Resources, and her many contributions to the University of Wyoming and to the state. Thank you. Thank you. This conference is one of my favorite events because it brings together such a dynamic mix of people: alumni, industry leaders, attorneys, policymakers, regulators, students, and researchers to explore the evolving legal and policy landscape surrounding energy in Wyoming and the Rocky Mountain West. I'd like to thank our conference sponsors who make this event possible. Thank you to the School of Energy Resources, the Gina Guy Center for Land and Water, BakerHostetler, Wellborn Sullivan Meck and Thule, Holland and Hart, Wyoming Rare, and Beatty Wozniak. I also want to thank our incredible conference steering committee. If you guys could stand if you're here. Dessa Reimer with Holland and Hart. Thank you, Dessa. Alex Obrecht with BakerHostetler. I bet Alex is sleeping in. I know he's coming. Joe Evers with Wyoming Rare. Thank you, Joe. Rebecca Watson with Wellborn Sullivan Meck and Thule couldn't join us today, along with Rob Mathis with Occidental, Matt Fry with the School of Energy Resources. I know Matt's here. Thank you, Matt. And then Affie Ellis with Brownstein. So this group of alumni and friends brings extraordinary insight and talent and commitment in shaping our agenda, identifying issues that matter most. Thank you so much for your time, your expertise, and the energy you've given to this year's program. Much appreciated. Thank you. Holly mentioned Christine and Peyton, but I want to give them a special thank you as well. Christine and I have been organizing this conference together for 11 years, and I truly could not do it without her. Her steady leadership, creativity, and deep institutional knowledge are so invaluable. So thank you, Christine. And Peyton Hayes, a special events coordinator for the School of Energy Resources, whose professionalism, attention to every detail has made the logistics of this event run smoothly. So thank you, Peyton, for all the work you've done behind the scenes. And finally, a quick plug for the attorneys in the room. If you're looking for some extra CLE credits here at the end of the year, I want to encourage you to attend the CJ Bach Symposium that's being hosted by the College of Law this Saturday. It's a truly creative event that's being organized by the students on the board of the Wyoming Law Review, and they are exploring the legal themes in Box's Joe Pickett novels. And they'll conclude with a keynote address by C.J. Box himself. So this is a really fun and engaging way to end Law Week. So if you need a few extra Steelies, consider joining us on Saturday. And finally, thank you for being here. Thank you for your time, your engagement, and your continued commitment to advancing energy, law, and policy in the Rockies. This conference thrives because of your thoughtful conversations and partnerships that happen in the room each year. So with that, let's get started. It's my pleasure to introduce our first keynote speaker, Trenton Thornock, the CEO of Prometheus Hyperscale. Trenton is the founder and CEO of Prometheus Hyperscale, a leading developer in sustainable hyperscale data centers. He's a visionary leader with a proven track record in the energy sector. He has extensive experience in finance, technology, and sustainable infrastructure. Previously, Trenton served as the Chief Financial Officer for the Miller Group, a Trinity Hunt partnership portfolio company. Trenton also held the role of Group Chief Financial Officer for WellDog, a high-growth energy technology company backed by Shell Ventures, and was Vice President and Chief Financial Officer for Scientific Drilling International, the world's largest private horizontal and directional energy company. So please help me in welcoming Trenton.
So thank you, Temple. It's great to be here. I appreciate the invitation to speak and give you a little bit of an overview on who Prometheus is and what we're doing. I first have to say that, like many of you who are locals, I probably had the same experience that you had back in high school, where there was a decision point where I had to decide whether I was going to join the rodeo club. And my dad just pointed out the back window at these young horses that hadn't been broken yet. He said, "There's your rodeo." So I'm a ranch kid and left the ranch, pursued a career, as you just heard, in ultimately corporate finance. I'm a CPA, not in public practice, so well familiar with the CPE, not the CLE. And with that, we'll start talking about Prometheus, Wyoming, and the future of compute. Okay. Got it. All right. So just to give you an overview of what we're looking at in terms of investment and opportunity in AI right now and data centers. This McKinsey study pointed out that we are going to need, between now and 2030, $6.7 trillion of investment worldwide to keep pace with the demand for compute. And as you can see, the lighter blue is kind of the traditional data center demand. The darker blue is AI. It has quickly taken a large chunk of the construction spend from all the major tech companies, neoclouds, and others. And we expect that the capacity is going to have to increase by 3.5 times between now and 2030. So what that means for communities is increased tax revenue, job creation, and significant investment that will also impact property taxes going forward. Just to give you an indication of the size of these investments, our first phase will cost, in Uinta County, Wyoming, will cost approximately $1.4 billion to build. The IT equipment that goes into that building will probably be worth somewhere between $4 and $6 billion. So that's all additional incremental tax base for property taxes in Uinta County. And I've been involved with various folks at Holland and Hart over the years trying to protect the sales and use tax exemption for data centers. It's extremely important because There are 37 states right now that have sales and use tax exemptions. The state of Utah effectively copied what was put into place during Governor Matt Mead's administration in order to make themselves competitive. And it's something that we have a close eye on, because if it goes away, it is likely that the tenants that we are trying to attract to Wyoming will also go elsewhere. The last point on the slide was the job multiplier, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. It's about 6x. So for every full-time job that we create inside the data center, once it's commissioned, we create another 6 in the community. So this is not going to be the great American novel, and it's not intended to give you death by PowerPoint. But normally I like to speak with no slides, so I'm going to have to slow down and stay on the slides, and hopefully it doesn't end up as death by PowerPoint here. But the punchline here is that Wyoming has exactly what AI needs, which is abundant power, a lot of land, and people who know how to build. And what I mean by that is the skilled trades that have been developed to work on Wyoming's oil and gas infrastructure are particularly suited for AI. The reason for that is most of the data centers that have been built over the last 25 years are air-cooled. So if you've ever walked into a data center or a compute campus, and I've been to the supercompute facility here at the University of Wyoming, it's loud. Got server fans screaming. In the large data centers, because of OSHA, there are certain dangers. One is you have to wear hearing protection. The other is that a lot of these larger facilities have what are called hot and cold aisles. So they're using air to keep the servers cool. And in the hot aisles, it can get pretty hot. Some of the server fan heat comes out at about 80 degrees Celsius. So it's pretty hot stuff. Moving to AI, the chip density that's coming out from all of the silicon manufacturers, so it doesn't matter whether we're talking about Intel, NVIDIA, ARM, all the chip roadmaps, and we can't disclose what we know about those, but all of them have what's called a thermal design power that was flat between about 2010 and 2020. That is now going parabolic. So they're packing much more compute into the same amount of space, which ultimately creates more heat. What's required to remove that heat and prevent the chips from melting is liquid cooling. And we'll talk about more about that in a moment. But back to energy. Wyoming produces 12 times the amount of energy that it consumes internally, and right now has the highest export ratio in the US. And that can be looked at two ways. The first way is that the state generates a lot of severance tax from development and extraction of minerals and generation of power. The downside to having the highest export ratio is that those electrons are being used in California, Oregon, Washington, Utah, and other places to generate economic impact. So while the state benefits from the extractive part of the power process, it does not participate in the ultimate use of those electrons. And we think that needs to change. Over the last couple of decades, there have been significant investments in all kinds of power generation in the state. In Wyoming, we're currently surrounded, at least in Uintah County, by 4 large-scale wind farms owned by TransAlta, Invenergy, and Berkshire Hathaway Energy Renewables. Those wind farms together generate over 400 megawatts of power. And that was one of the reasons why we chose our flagship site. There are a lot of challenges around developing for AI, and these are the main ones. there's a lot of grid sensitivity. So originally, we had a miss to take 120 megawatts from Rocky Mountain Power. We went back to them in February and said, look, Rocky Mountain Power, we've got this thing called AI, and now all of our tenants, the neoclouds, the big tech companies, are telling us they need AI cluster sizes in the 300 megawatt range for one of the tenants that we're negotiating with, and the 700 megawatt range for one of the other tenants that we're negotiating with. And we're working on an independent power producer joint venture with one of the largest power generators in the United States to build 1.2 gigawatts of natural gas-fired generation, and we'd like to connect that to the grid. And the response was basically, that's very funny. The entire energy consumption of the state of Wyoming on a peak day with the Microsoft data centers in Cheyenne, NCAR, and all the other electricity users across the state is approximately 1 gigawatt. So you're telling us you want to drop 1.2 gigawatts of power on a corner of the state where the grid is at 138 kV. So for those of you who are not power experts, and I'm not either, but we have engineers and commercial people who are, we can run about a maximum of about 200 megawatts on a 138 kV line. So the reality is the grid is not prepared to handle the kinds of loads that are coming. The other challenges around state and federal permitting, and I almost want to cross off state from the slide because our happy permitting activities have been with Uintah County. We're in an unincorporated part of Uintah County. Uintah County is zoned, so we're in a properly zoned area. And it took us only a couple of public meetings going through planning and zoning and through the county commissioners to get to a conditional use permit. It also didn't take very long for us to get Class 5 permits to do our geothermal exchange, which is our way of taking water consumption for our data center design to zero. So we use water, there's water in the pipes, but we basically use a deep superficial aquifer that is below where municipalities, residents, and agriculture are going to use the aquifer. We don't care if it's good water or bad water, so it can be alkaline or saline. Doesn't bother us as long as it's plentiful. We basically pump that up through a set of heat exchangers, and then we pump it right back down into the same aquifer that it came from. So some people think of that as a closed loop system because the two well bores are not connected at the bottom. It's technically an open loop. So effectively what that does is it takes the data center heat that would otherwise be rejected to the atmosphere, and it permanently sequesters it 1,000 feet down in the ground. To add to the longevity of that system, we have also devised heat hosts that can strip heat out of the waste heat stream before the water goes back into the ground, and the main use will be agriculture. So think of shrimp farms if we're talking about aquaculture, or microgreens, or other fresh produce if we're talking about greenhouse products. The third piece here is workforce needs and impacts. When we get into the sites that we've selected in Wyoming, they happen to have a legacy of oil and gas development. But there are still needs that we need to provide for based on the number of people who will be on site. So if you went to the Stargate site in Abilene today, you'd find about 7,000 people working. And so we need to make accommodation for that kind of workforce. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide, but it's talking about community prosperity. And there are basically two phases of that we'll go through. The first one is the economic impact during the construction period and commissioning, and then the economic impact that comes during the operation of the data center. One of the reasons back in 2020, before people thought about liquid cooling and AI, we started working on a 100% liquid-cooled hyperscale model. So what that means is we pulled together a team of the preeminent experts in liquid cooling, which at the time was not a mainstream technology. We first went through a design exercise where we started with a blank sheet of paper and decided what that needed to look like from a water protection perspective, because we're developing, at least in that side of the state, inside the Colorado River Basin, which is water stressed. So we wanted to get to zero water consumption. We wanted to do liquid inside the data halls to facilitate AI, ML, machine learning, and HPC, high performance compute. And we were particularly focused on the HPC piece. So there's HPC here at the University of Wyoming's Energy Lab. And we were sort of modeling it on the second version of the HPC that went into ExxonMobil's campus in the Woodlands, where they do all of their seismic processing. So that was the area of the market that we were focused on. We spent, over the next several years, about $7 million on design and engineering. And I spent the next several years trying to sell that into a market that didn't want to accept it, because the prevailing wisdom was, we don't need this kind of compute density. It's excessive. There's a limited market for this. And maybe you ought to try to market yourselves to healthcare research, medical research, to the oil and gas companies. And there's probably not enough demand out there to soak up 120 megawatts of high density compute supply. Of course, all that got flipped on its head when ChatGPT got released. So this kind of leads us to what we are today. And our purpose in being is to develop scalable, next-gen, liquid-cooled digital infrastructure for the age of AI. So although we started at this, again, from a sustainability and resource consumption standpoint, trying to optimize for power and water consumption, it ended up that we are perfectly situated to handle not just the current generation of chips, say from NVIDIA, but also the next generation that will come 18 to 24 months from now. And this is another area where we got into a little serendipity, right? Because we were doing the right things for what we thought were the right reasons. We recently completed an engineering specification comparison with one of the neoclouds. So they have a confidential specification for this Vera Rubin chip that I just mentioned. When we did the detailed comparison against our design, we hit about 85% of their design criteria for a chip that has not been released based on a design we did in 2021. So I give all the credit for this to our engineering team. Like I said, we went around and found the best in the business. I think it would be difficult, if not impossible, to assemble the same project team at this point because there's so much demand. And the bottom line is we're committed to the values that built the American West in the first place. So freedom, ingenuity, and work that's grounded in real community impact. And that's what kept me going during the years when we were ahead of the market. I started this company to give back to the community that produced me. And now we're here to develop solutions that will deliver across the entire state of Wyoming. So we do have a community-centered approach. Investing here is a top priority for us. Prometheus is now not just a project, but a platform. You can see the second site is in Casper. I know there are some folks here who may be familiar with the ranch where it's being developed. It's the Falls Ranch, so it sits between Casper and Glen Rock. It's right on the border of Natrona and Converse counties. And our intention is to replicate what we developed for Southwest Wyoming and do that in Casper. We have also announced a partnership with Engie. Engie is a French company. It is the largest power generator on the planet. And we are partnered with them in Texas to co-locate on their battery storage and solar assets to replicate smaller versions of what we're doing in Wyoming. Based on announcements from Crusoe and others in the industry coming into Wyoming, when these facilities are fully operational, we think we can get the Evanston campus up to about 5 gigawatts total over time. The Casper campus can get up to about 1.5. Wyoming should host at that time about 10 gigawatts of AI compute power, which rivals the largest clusters in the world, including the cluster in Northern Virginia, which is basically Data Center Alley. That's what people call it now. This is our flagship project overview. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going through the construction process. Just suffice it to say that these projects are long lead. It takes a long time to get the permits. It takes a long time to do the design and engineering. And then the construction takes several years before we're ready to have live compute. One of the other things that we did in Wyoming, and the cases are different in terms of the partners that we're working with in Western Wyoming and in Casper, but we've done a first-of-a-kind partnership with Pure West Energy and Frontier Carbon. So Pure West Energy operates in the Pinedale Anticline in Sublette County mainly, and has done a lot of work over the years to minimize fugitive methane emissions. So they now have a verified low carbon natural gas supply. We combine that with Frontier's carbon removal credits. So these are carbon abatement credits. Basically what happens is Frontier uses the Union Pacific to rail CO2, liquid CO2 out to their site in Sweetwater County and northeastern Uintah County, Wyoming. And they permanently sequester the CO2, the liquid CO2 in Class 6 wells. So if you take the abatement credit that we buy from, can buy from Frontier, you staple that to the low methane emissions certification that we get from Pure West, and then staple that to our power bill, even though we're burning natural gas, from an actual CO2 production and sequestration perspective, we're at zero. So everybody talks about net zero. Nobody talks about how you actually do it. So these credits and attributes are auditable, they're traceable. Blockchain has been used to be able to verify that they're not being duplicated, which is a big problem in the RIN market. So we have what will be the first of a kind net zero data center, and it's going to be in Wyoming. Similarly, at the Casper site, or at the Falls Ranch site, we're going to call it, we have a partnership with Casper Carbon Capture and Spiritus. So Spiritus is a direct air capture company, and Casper Carbon Capture is a carbon injection and sequestration company. And so similar to what we're doing in Western Wyoming, we can use natural gas to produce power. Based on market availability, we were able to grab several hundred megawatts of fuel cells. So these don't have any moving parts. It's an accepted technology that's become critical out in California because they have major power constraints. And so I've been to data centers in California that are running on these fuel cells. They work just great. The nicest thing about them is the waste products are CO2 and water. Because there's no combustion, you don't have any NOx, you don't have any of the other stuff that comes out the stack. in any kind of combustion process. So let's talk about the real numbers. This is where it gets fun because this analysis was done by the University of Wyoming Center for Business and Economic Analysis. Now, the numbers that you see on the screen are for the data center only. So it does not include the economic impact of building the power generation. And it also does not include the impact of the workforce hub. So on the Falls Ranch, we have plenty of acreage to do what's called a workforce hub. Prometheus, and we've been public about this, partners with a publicly traded company called Target Hospitality out of the Woodlands to build workforce hubs. UNA County has offered us acreage, and Mary Throne, who's here today, is working to get all the LOI papered up. But the point behind that is we've been offered acreage by the county to place the workforce hub, and that is where the skilled trades will be. So you can kind of contrast this with what happened in the early 1980s when I was a kid in Evanston. You had roughnecks come in, a lot of maybe folks who had served time. It was pretty wild. The people that come in to build these liquid-cooled AI data centers are a lot of journeyman electricians. So these are folks generally who have families. They're highly skilled. A lot of pipe fitters, some welders. And so it's kind of a different workforce mix on the front end. On the back end, when we get to the right side of the screen, during operations, these are all six-figure jobs. So to run a data center, sometimes you have to be a journeyman electrician if you're messing with the servers, because there's 480 volt distribution that goes to the rack. And what that means is generally you're pulling in a workforce, as many as you can get from the community. So we'll take anybody who's available locally, who is qualified. And then the people that have to be moved in to operate these facilities generally come from facilities maintenance and operations partners. Ours is a company called Salute. It was co-founded by a former colonel, and their specialty is attracting people out of the U.S. Navy nuclear sub program. So these are highly qualified engineers, well-educated, squared away, background checked, and good folks to have in the community to the extent that we need them. You can see the numbers here kind of eye-popping. During the construction phase, we have about a $5 billion value add, and that's on the first 1.2 megawatts, or gigawatts, excuse me. About $13 million in county taxes and $27 million in what we're calling sub-county taxes. So mainly property and other taxes. And sales and use tax on the non-data center equipment that does not have an exemption. Once we get to operations in 2028 to 2020 or 2032, there's a $2.5 billion value add. There's $13 million in county tax and $29 million in sub-county tax, and the sub-county tax there is the property tax on the IT equipment that comes into the data hall. So it's significant, and I'd like to acknowledge the people in the small print who did all of the work around this at UW. So there's a lot of fear around AI. The reality is that the data centers are kind of the picks and shovels, and that is what is reshaping the global economy. And Wyoming as a state is uniquely poised to lead this very broadly. We strongly believe that, and that's why the bulk of our development pipeline is in Wyoming. That's the end of the presentation. I just got my 5-minute warning, which enables us to take questions for a few minutes if there are any. One word, NEPA. So we control the land, well, I should say my family controls the land bank where Prometheus is developing in Uintah County. So we have, just like a lot of places in Wyoming, a collection of private sections, state of Wyoming sections, which are not a problem, county rights of way and easements, and our CUP stipulates that we have an MOU with the county to use their rights of way and easements. We have rights of way and easements across 7 square miles of our private land. And there are 2 corners where we have a private road that was originally developed in 1900 for oil and gas extraction. Questar Infocom uses it for a communications tower on the top of Aspen Mountain, which is where the rail tunnels go through the mountain out there. They have an existing Bureau of Land Management permit, and we met with Questar Infocom and said, hey, it would be great if before we submit our permits to the Bureau of Land Management, if you write a letter of recommendation telling them that you think it's a great idea, if we're also able to use this road, we can use it to haul horses and cattle in and out, but that's it. We need to improve it so that it's at standard for the folks who are working on the data center and in the data center. We need it to lay power cable, fiber optic cable, and a water line, which doesn't seem very difficult, but I've been at it for 5 years. And on the second group of submissions, the Bureau of Land Management was kind enough to add 3 deficiencies. We've cleared the first 2. The first one was a plant study of a plant that is not endangered. So we paid a significant sum of money to have that study done. That plant doesn't exist up there. We didn't find a single plant. The next deficiency was a paleo study. So my brother leases and operates the ranch that is adjacent to Fossil Butte National Monument. That's about 35 miles away from us. There's about 300 feet of overburden, tertiary overburden in our area over any fossil-bearing formations, but that argument doesn't stick with Bureau of Land Management. They basically say this is what you have to do, and if you don't want to do it, then you're not going to get your permit. So, does that answer your question? NEPA. Yes.
Have you considered the impacts of a call on the Colorado River, or a change to the Colorado River Compact, or the costs of regulation to social impacts of AI generation, to the cost of the project overall, or the feasibility of the cost of carbon capture on the feasibility of the project overall?
Yeah, so we'll start with carbon capture. So while we have these agreements, we can't force our tenants to pay that extra money. So what we've done is create an opportunity for them to be responsible. And at the end of the day, if they don't want to pay for carbon sequestration, there's not going to be carbon sequestration. So that's the hard economic reality. As far as the impacts on the community, of course, that's front of mind for us. We've been in that neighborhood for 6 generations, at least on that side of the state. I have a cousin who lives in Glen Rock. So those considerations are front of mind for us as a local developer. We look at the trade-offs, and there are always trade-offs. There's no free lunch, and with any economic development, there's going to be impact on the community. But as we look at the size from a pure capital perspective of the investment that goes into the county and the amount of property tax that's generated, it's enormous compared to the existing county budgets. And we think it's in the community's favor, and we've talked to Uintah County Economic Development. We've had a number of meetings with the commissioners, working meetings with the commissioners over the years, and they're all very comfortable with what we're doing. The last point on the Colorado River Compact, based on our cooling architecture, our impact on the Colorado River drainage is 0. We don't consume water. And if the geothermal wells don't have enough capacity, we have an alternate cooling plant design that consumes more power, but which is basically the same as the one that was announced over in Cheyenne recently that is 0 water consumption. And it consists of dry coolers and chiller plant, which is all mechanical. So there's no water that goes into the process. Does that answer your question?
The second question on the regulation was broader. On the, if there's a federal regulation on the output of artificial intelligence, generation of content, chat GPT, overhaul of intelligence generated on a federal level, will that impact the feasibility of the project at a local level, was the question.
No, because the check down for the facility, if AI becomes unfeasible, is as basic cloud infrastructure. So we can still make our payback objectives just doing cloud services to run your Oracle, your SAP instance, basic web stuff.
Please join me in thanking Trevor. Thank you. Trenton, I'm sorry. Exciting times ahead for Wyoming. Thank you. All right, it's my pleasure to now introduce Alex Obrecht, who's going to provide the oil and gas law and policy update. Alex is a former student, so it's with great pride that I read his biography because he's gone on to do some pretty amazing things since graduating from the University of Wyoming College of Law. Alex is currently a partner at the Denver office of BakerHostetler and co-leads the firm's national energy industry team. He concentrates his practice on energy regulations and litigation, focusing on oil and gas development on federal lands, hazardous materials transportation, and compliance with oil and gas royalties. Having grown up and attended law school in Wyoming, Alex adds a practical understanding of the complex legal environment in which these clients operate. Prior to law school, Alex worked for Credit Suisse, a Switzerland-based investment bank. During his tenure, he was involved in securities trading that occurred after the Macondo well blowout, which gave Alex insight into the corporate and financial aspects of issues affecting energy clients. So please welcome Alex as he provides our oil and gas law and policy update.
Thank you, Temple, and thank you everyone for being here. It's nice to have the morning spot, a lot of fresh eyes. I usually get the 4 p.m. spot when everyone's creeping to the back for cold Coors Lights. But this is the 11th time this conference has been put on. I'd just like to take a minute to thank Temple, Dr. Krutka, Christine, for all the work that goes into this. I think they've put in an absolutely phenomenal program. But I will note from my bio, Temple left out one of my favorite stories with Temple, which is she actually coached us in an environmental moot court team. And despite what she lies about me doing anything impressive, which is a lie, absolutely, she was not so impressed when Joe Evers and I and our teammates were more interested in watching football and drinking beer at Buffalo Wild Wings than studying and preparing for the moot court. But we did make it into the final rounds. So I'm filling in for Pete Obermueller. He couldn't be here with us today to give the update, but I do appreciate that he had the insight to give us that heads up before the night before. The last time I got tabbed to speak, really on the eve, my colleague said, "Hey, look, I'm going to give this talk, but I got to go to the hospital right now because my wife is in false labor. Don't worry about it, though. It's just false labor. I can do it." I was like, well, I'm no OBGYN, but I'm pretty sure false labor leads to labor. And sure enough, there was a baby at 6 a.m., and here I was presenting on his slides. But a couple of the topics that Pete wanted to hit. Of course, we have to talk about what's happened from the president's desk. And these are all of the day one executive orders. And that's declaration of a national emergency and the deregulatory initiative. but then also the statutory reform that has happened in the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. We'll do a little case law update, but what Pete wanted to hear about was will it last? Because I don't know that we can give you empirical evidence, but off the cuff in the cases I was involved in, for the previous round of this administration, the track record for the deregulatory initiative is not great. So let's start first with EO 14156. And this is the declaration of a national energy emergency. Covers fossil fuels and critical minerals. And primarily what it does is it invokes statutory authorities that are already codified for various executive branches to exercise emergency procedures. And the focus is supposed to be on permitting, locating, producing fossil fuels and critical minerals. Shortly after, the Department of Interior implemented its version of the emergency permitting. And it covers NEPA, the Endangered Species Act, and National Historic Preservation Act. Now, NEPA here, these are very lofty goals. EA within 14 days, that's certainly quicker, but the percentage decrease is nowhere near what we're looking at for an EIS or environmental impact statement. The average, and these numbers are a bit dated, but your average project that required an EIS floats around 3 years. Many are done quicker, some that are very much longer, but falls out in about 3 years. Now it's supposed to be done in 28 days. And the data here is a little opaque, but the only project that I've been able to find that has been approved under this authority is actually a uranium and vanadium mine. And I think it's actually just a mine expansion. When this was issued, many of my clients, from the individual operator perspective, were excited to get moving. But you actually saw a lot of pushback from trade associations, particularly in the context of just your standard APD or permit. They thought the lightning rod of litigation risk of invoking this type of emergency approval was just too great to risk on it. Plus, there's a very, very healthy statutory and regulatory categorical exclusion option for APDs. So if you're looking at the APD level instead of the project level, why not just go a tried and true route? And of course, as you would expect, this emergency order has been challenged. A group of 13 states and their attorneys general filed suit in the District of Washington. It's still in its early stages. I believe we just have answers so far. But the case does focus on primarily challenging the executive order. But it also ropes in the various secretarial orders or other orders from other agencies to implement the emergency permitting procedures. And I think why you often see folks roping in the executive order is because you're looking for that headline, that press release, state v. Trump. But you run into a problem here, especially with the National Emergencies Act, that invoking a national emergency is solely reserved to the executive. So you have a non-justiciable political question. But the answer isn't the same always for your secretarial orders or your agency orders. Now, you might run into some issues still with a facial challenge that nothing has actually been implemented. You don't have any finality. But we will see how this case ultimately ends up playing out. And now the real heart of the policy shift going on right now comes from EO 14154, otherwise known as Unleashing American Energy. Well, one sec, before I get there, another comment on the National Emergency Act. Department of Interior also has some issues with its ability to invoke emergency procedures. Because what the National Emergency Act does is it unlocks those already in statute extra powers in times of emergency. How the Secretary did it for NEPA was under its own NEPA regulations. And I have not been able to find, nor have I been made aware of, in any of BLM's organic statutes or NEPA itself, the ability to invoke these emergency procedures. Now, there are some emergency procedures for things like military use of public lands, but nothing specifically covering the invocation of these emergency permitting procedures. But back to unleashing American energy. So this is really focused on, like, let's produce from federal lands and federal waters. Fossil fuels, minerals. Now, I'll leave the mining part out of it, and I'll try to leave as much of the NEPA part out of it, because we're going to have an excellent panel on that after this. But really, where the meat of this comes in is the deregulatory initiative. So it calls on all agencies to review any policies, regulations, orders that cause an undue burden on energy development. And they're supposed to, within 30 days, prepare their list and submit it of just how they're going to go about revising, rescinding, or otherwise issuing regulations that promote development. And which I was a bit sad to see, but as you expect with administration change. Also, they're supposed to work with DOJ to stay or otherwise pause any of the litigation to any Biden regulations or policies. So of course, we went from a full plate of legal challenges to now twiddling my thumbs a little bit more. But it also revokes 12 EOs, almost all of them from the last administration. But as we'll hear from Dessa and her panel, there's also a heavy focus on permitting reform. NEPA is not the only thing, but I think it is the biggest thing and the most common theme we hear. But it also terminates the Green New Deal. And I think we've actually gotten to a spot now where your traditional fossil fuel industry was said, like, we don't need to attack wind and solar, but we just want a level playing field for development. I think you even hear some within the traditional industry saying, well, I think now the pendulum's actually swinging a little too far. We're going a little too far in penalizing renewable development and making that too difficult. But it also has a focus on reviving approval for LNG export terminals. Now, this is an important piece, because obviously this is, hey, we need more production. More production, prices go down. And we're already in situations with traditional oil basins where your net back, meaning the price you actually get paid after any midstream costs for residue gas, methane, is actually negative. And the only reason you're producing is for the value of the oil and to some extent the fractionated natural gas liquids. But if we open up LNG markets and the ability to actually export, you should see, ideally, an ability and a desire to continue producing natural gas as prices stabilize here in the US. And of course, this executive order has also been challenged. And in this challenge, they also brought in the declaration of a national emergency. This is Lighthizer v. Trump. It was brought by a group of youth plaintiffs in the District of Montana. Now, this case was very far-reaching. Essentially, they wanted the court to rescind both the executive orders and implement policy for the executive branch that said, hey, our regulatory initiatives are paused as of the last day of the Biden administration. And just yesterday, the court dismissed that case on standing grounds, specifically the redressability prong, but kind of very similar to a non-justiciable political question. The court looked at the relief the plaintiffs wanted and said, well, that's really not something an Article III judge can do. This might be different if you had brought me a specific project, something that I could say, yes, this didn't apply with the governing law. But when you look at political policy as a whole, that's just not something the court can do. And the plaintiffs have already vowed to appeal to the Ninth Circuit. After my read, which of course it was last night at 11 p.m., so it wasn't the most thorough, but I mean, the standing analysis is quite sound, and I personally don't think this should be going any further, at least in this manner. Now, let's look at what the Department of the Interior has done after unleashing American energy. A day after, they issued similarly titled secretarial order, And this is where the actual nuts and bolts are happening. It tasks the assistant secretaries with identifying all of the regulatory policies, orders, and the like that cause an undue burden. And at least in the secretarial order, there are at least 27 of these identified. And specific in the oil and gas realm, we're looking at the leasing rule, conservation rule, venting and flaring, and of course there's also some focus on the RMPs, which are resource management plans under FLIPMO. And that's actually an interesting angle, because it seems as though the administration can't quite figure out which route they want to take here. Now, some of these are oil and gas focused, but really one of the big focus, at least for us, and I'll bring it into the oil and gas talk, is the moratorium on new coal leasing in the Powder River Basin. So that's the Buffalo RMP and the Miles City, Montana RMP. So there's already work being done to revise those. But now, in recent opinions, the administration has said, well, an RMP, it prescribes uses of land. This looks exactly like a rule under the Administrative Procedure Act. This needs to be submitted for congressional approval under the Congressional Review Act. And so I wasn't quite able to tally exactly where they stand, but they are now going through the process of rescinding or rejecting RMPs through the Congressional Review Act. So where do we actually stand as we sit here right now? As I mentioned, almost all the litigation from the Biden policies are stayed, but we've seen somewhat slow movement on the underlying rescission or revision of some rules. Particularly, we have a challenge to the leasing rule here in the District of Wyoming, and we get continual status updates, but it's undergoing review. And one of the key focuses here, some of this has been done through statute, as we'll talk about in a minute, but is bonding. There were severe bonding increases for the statewide level and lease-wide level, and they did away with the ability to bond on a national level. Now, for most of your companies, this isn't a terribly huge issue, but it is an issue for small family-run oil and gas operators, particularly that run a lot of stripper wells. Because when you combine that with the instruction memorandum that mandates bond adequacy reviews, folks' bonds are going from $10,000 to $3.5 million. Not every case is near that extreme, but it is enough to put a small family-run company out of business. But of course, we run into staffing concerns. How's all this going to get done? This was already an issue with the last version of this administration. But now we have the added complexity of DOGE layoffs and cuts, and of course, as we sit here right now, the shutdown. But we also see an issue with direction from political appointees to the actual folks in the field, district, or state office who are making the decision. We've had a number of what we thought were fairly discrete issues that we had been assured were handled in the DC level. But then it takes months, and sometimes maybe not ever, for that to trickle down to your actual approval from the field office. And I mean, it's just it's a lack of communication. There's a lot of stuff going on. But the field office often has not been directed to do anything different from the status quo. But we do have some of the drafts of the deregulatory agenda items have been issued. One being the conservation rule rescission, but we're still waiting on the leasing rule. And another one is we have drafts of environmental assessments for most of the challenged lease sales, and those have been issued and public comment closed on Monday. Now, these relate to a series of judicial challenges that mostly in a successful manner challenged every federal oil and gas onshore lease sale from end of 2015 through 2020. Now, the successful challenges were in the District of Montana, District of DC, and the District of Idaho. And the primary item there was greenhouse gas and climate change, and whether the analysis in the NEPA documents was sufficient. But Montana also adds in some issues with groundwater and sage grouse out of the District of Idaho. And the problem with this was, that's a crazy amount of acreage that has now been put into some type of purgatory status, whether it's been issued but suspended, whether it's been vacated, or whether it's subject to a subsequent settlement agreement. Because after they would challenge one lease sale or a number of lease sales successfully, plaintiffs would just bring the exact same copycat lawsuit against the subsequent lease sales. And the issue with that is those are governed by a settlement agreement. And a settlement agreement requires NEPA compliance with the deficiencies the court found, but also with various other policies that have already been revoked, such as using the social cost of carbon and estimating downstream impacts, indirect impacts. Now, from what I have seen of the drafts, the administration actually did a pretty good job, I believe, using probably what had already been prepared in this from the previous administration to issue these EAs. But likely, hopefully, what we will see from that is that we will actually get these leases issued, and folks will be able to actually develop them, or as we'll talk about later, even just traverse them. So now we've looked at it from the regulatory perspective. But of course, policies such as EOs, secretarial orders, and regulations are easier to undo every time we have a switch in political party in the executive branch. So now we're seeing a focus, and it's been there for a while, to start putting the reform measures in statute. And so we have one here from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. It has a few key oil and gas provisions, but many of them actually fell out. And so what it does is it repeals many of the provisions from the Inflation Reduction Act related to federal onshore oil and gas leasing and lease terms. That's your royalty rate, your expression of interest fee, and all that is when you say in the leasing process, like, I am interested in this parcel being included in a lease sale. You, under the Inflation Reduction Act, you'd have to pay a fee for doing that. And it removes the royalty on so-called extracted methane. But it also requires quarterly onshore lease sales and adds definitions for eligible and available. Now, the text of the Mineral Leasing Act already requires that the Secretary offer lease sales for each state on a quarterly basis where lands are eligible and available. Now, we've litigated this down in New Mexico and twice here in Wyoming. In New Mexico, we actually overturned an IM, essentially a settlement agreement, where they changed an IM that said, well, we're only going to offer from each district or field office within a state that actually has the ability to process these leases and process the lease sale. We've done it in Wyoming. I've had issues with standing, and most recently in the decision I've laid out here with the definition of available. So both eligible and available have regulatory definitions. And eligible are things like, can it actually be leased? Is it national park or something else that is statutorily excluded? Available is slightly different. Available includes, well, have all the other statutory processes been met? And you often see lease sales be deferred for failure to have actually conducted the NEPA analysis and other things such as staffing concerns and something that we always kind of get a chuckle about, but being from Wyoming, you understand, a snowstorm. So it also requires that BLM actually put the leases up for bid within 18 months of nomination. And this is a big one because you'll have some operators that are developing a field and there is a key piece of federal acreage in the heart of the field. And they nominate it and it just sits in purgatory and never actually gets offered for lease. And hopefully this provision will help. But one of the items that has some operators quite excited is it also contains a provision to mandate approval for commingling of federal production with state and fee production. In the past, you could only do this in certain scenarios. And it becomes quite an issue with horizontal drilling, where you might be drilling 640, 1280, or even bigger drilling and spacing unit. And in that, you're gonna have federal interests, you're gonna have state interests, you're gonna have fee interests. And it used to be the way you'd have to construct your infrastructure is such that you have separate trains, separate storage, separate measurement, for any well that's producing federal acreage, and it's quite costly. And so now the bill has mandated that you can get around this, or you can get an approval for it, if you use wellhead metering. And essentially what that is you're moving your facility measurement point from once everything has been commingled up to the wellhead. Or if you have a wellhead allocation methodology that gets you within a 2% margin of error. And finally, any other approved methods. The development on this has been somewhat slow. We have an instruction memorandum that was just issued by BLM, but really all that does is says, within the current regulatory scheme, how we're going to approve these under the One Big Beautiful Bill Act is we're going to use, essentially the uncertain circumstances or exigent circumstances exception in this. So one case that might be of interest here, and it relates to the lease sales litigation, is True Oil v. BLM. And really what it relates to is an operator wanted to develop its drilling and spacing unit from a pad that was offset from the drilling and spacing unit. But to do so, it had to traverse the federal mineral estate, go through, but not produce from the federal mineral estate. In True Oil, it took it to the BLM, said, well, this is all we want to do. We're not producing, and as we're looking at subsurface trespass law, there's going to be no interference with the federal mineral estate. Somebody else can come in and develop. We don't think we need an APD. And of course, BLM disagreed and ultimately ended up in True Oil suing BLM in the District of Wyoming. And primarily it was based around the subsurface trespass law, but also regulatory and statutory authority under the Mineral Leasing Act. The district court took a slightly different tact, and it traced back to the powers that were enabled from the act that actually severed the surface from the minerals. And said in this context, maybe there won't be any interference, but it's certainly within BLM's regulatory authority to require an APD in this circumstance. Now, just last month, the 10th Circuit issued an opinion, and of course, it took a completely different route. Nothing that had been argued in the district court, but it said, look, when you really boil this down, this is a property rights dispute. And any property right dispute with the federal government needs to be filed under the Quiet Title Act. So it dismissed on jurisdictional grounds. And so it leaves open the possibility of other challenges in other districts to this type of scenario. Now, ideally, this is not going to be something that recurs in the immediate future as we get this issue fixed through the appropriate administrative channels, but it does leave open that possibility. So will this all stand? The administration has a stated goal to get out all of the rescissions and revisions by the end of 2025. Now, it's highly ambitious, and it's looking even more so with a shutdown. Very unlikely to have all that happen. The idea here would be to get everything through court challenges and be able to address whatever deficiencies, if any, a court may find. But of course, we're going to have legal challenges. As we've already discussed, many of them have already been filed, and they're certain to be filed once we get final regulatory action. And the last go-around is an extremely rough track record. Because as the plaintiffs do, and as they should, they switch the forum. These cases were primarily brought in the Northern District of California, the hotbed of oil and gas development. And at least as it relates to oil and gas, I'm only familiar with one rule, rescission, that has actually been upheld, and that was within the last month. After 10 years of litigation, NGOs in the state of California finally dropped their appeal in the 9th Circuit to the hydraulic fracturing rule rescission. So I think we'll continue to see a push for statutory reform. Insulate some of these policies as much as you can. But it is far harder to enact statutes that are clear enough, precise enough, to really impact the nuts and bolts happening on the ground. And of course, midterms are going to complicate that. It's hard enough to get anything through a one-party controlled Congress, let alone split party or opposing parties in the executive and the congressional. Folks also fear there's going to be a push for tougher state-level regulations. Now, I think this one is a bit far-fetched. From the experience from Colorado in Senate Bill 181 and the overhaul of the Oil and Gas Commission and the Energy and Carbon Management Commission, folks feared that every other state was going to go that way. And I think what we're going to see is you might see some movement in New Mexico, but I think the other traditional Rockies, oil and gas producing states are going to stay their course. And so with that, I think I've used the time, but happy to address any questions if there are any.
Thanks, Alex. And I know he'll be around the rest of the day if anybody else has questions, they want to grab him on a break. All right, it's my pleasure to introduce Travis Deti, who's going to give us the mining law and policy update. Travis is the president of the Wyoming Mining Association. He joined the association in 2011 and has been the executive director since 2016. Travis serves as a unified voice for the Wyoming mining industry, advocating for its interests with elected officials, state and federal regulators, and the public. He represents Western Coal with the American Coal Associations and serves on the University of Wyoming Nuclear Energy Research Council Advisory Board. Previously, Travis worked as a legislative assistant and field representative for U.S. Senators Craig Thomas and John Barrasso in both Wyoming and Washington, D.C. Travis is a former sergeant in the United States Marine Corps and a veteran of Operation Iraqi Freedom. Appointed to the Wyoming Veterans Commission by Governor Matt Mead, he served 10 years, ending his term as chairman in 2021. He's a 2016 graduate of the Leadership Wyoming program. He's a Wyoming native who holds a degree in political science from the University of Wyoming. Please join me in welcoming Travis.
Well, thank you very much for that kind introduction. It's a pleasure to be here. And I appreciate the invite. And before I go into my little spiel, what I'm going to give is like basically a 1,000-foot level of the state of your mining industry today and some of the interesting things that are happening. It's an exciting time. But I do want to also recognize Dr. Krutka and for the work that you've done. You know, we in the mining industry in Wyoming, we're a very special state. And we have a very good working relationship with the University of Wyoming, largely that due to Dr. Krutka and her efforts. Really appreciate you, Holly. And we're going to miss you. You leave big shoes to fill. Also like to, Director Parfit is in the audience as well. Again, we do a lot of work with the Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality, and unlike a lot of other states, we have an excellent working relationship with our state regulators. And it's really one of these situations to where we're all pulling in the same direction in the state of Wyoming, whether it's our work with the efforts of the University of Wyoming School of Energy Resources or our state regulators, because we all have one goal in the mining industry. It's to develop our resources in an economical, environmentally friendly, and responsible way, and a safe way as well, because Wyoming runs on extraction. And, you know, we enjoy the quality of life that we have in Wyoming today, our low tax burden. Some people would say even lower tax burden now, but our low tax burden, because the mining industry pays the bills. Extraction pays the bills. And we're happy to do that. But, you know, when you look about of what we're trying to do, especially in these exciting and interesting times in the mining industry, you've got to keep your minerals economically viable. You've got to be able to get them out of the ground, because if you can't get them out of the ground, nothing from nothing is nothing. So we've got to continue to work with our partners at the state level, and continue our fight with folks at the federal level, so that we're able to develop the resource so that we can keep our quality of life here in Wyoming. So a little bit about the Mining Association. So we're the state's trade association. That we represent the state's coal companies, uranium companies, bentonite, and trona, natural soda ash. Those are our industrial minerals. We also represent the companies that are developing uncovering rare earth deposits in the state of Wyoming. We've got a little gold company that's going to mine gold here east of Laramie, in between Laramie and Cheyenne, which is an exciting project. We've also got a company developing lithium. And so there's a lot going on. And, you know, I'm gonna kind of take a different tack. The previous speaker kind of hit at some of the more technical stuff and the at the federal level. But just a snapshot of your industry. Your trona industry, you know, we've got a very unique deposit in southwest Wyoming, unique anywhere in the world. And that trona is manufactured in a natural soda ash, which is used in glass, baking soda, chemicals, paper products. You know, you use it every day, whether you know it or not. Markets are a little soft right now, but you know, they continue to march and move forward. And you know, you're seeing expansion projects right now, so that's a good thing. And you know, your bentonite industry, everybody uses a little bit of bentonite. It's used in, you know, really tied to the oil and gas industry and in oil field products, drilling mud, plug mud. You use it in your cosmetics that you use every day. If you drink a glass of wine, you're drinking Wyoming bentonite as a clarifying agent. And of course, we're the cat litter capital of the world. Your pet litter is Wyoming bentonite, so if you want to support your Wyoming bentonite industry, buy cats. A lot going on in the uranium space. You know, we've seen a great shift and this renewed focus on nuclear energy and building up our nuclear capabilities in the United States of America. We've been off the playing field for a long time. And, you know, our uranium production, we're still the nation's leader in uranium production. We were down really low a few years ago. It took a war to get our prices back up and stabilized. You're seeing companies starting to produce again. We've got 3 mines in production. You'll have another one online probably by the end of the year. And, you know, that's a good thing. And there's a lot of stuff happening, you know, in the nuclear space in Wyoming too, in the nation. And we've got some real interesting challenges, I think. You know, everyone wants to support their uranium miners. You know, politicians do, but when you look towards building out that customer base, because we got to send our product somewhere, and to see kind of some of the stuff that's going on in Wyoming right now, where you want to mine the stuff, but you don't want the projects that are going to use your uranium. So that's an interesting political project there, question as well. And there's a lot going on in the coal side. You know, elections have consequences, and public policy means something. And you know, what we've seen in recent months is a very significant 180-degree shift in public policy. And we have an administration now with a very different set of priorities from the previous administration. And honestly, I want to just kind of say, you know, preface this with, you know, nothing is as good as it seems and nothing's as bad as it seems. And the reality falls in between. And I think that's what we've got to kind of consider, you know, when we're working in the environment today. We've had an administration, you know, for the last, you know, 15, 16 years, take out 4 years, that has actively been incentivizing you through federal policy our utilities to remove their coal from the grid. And it's been very effective, frankly. What we're seeing right now is kind of the exact opposite, where you're seeing an administration that is incentivizing utilities to keep your coal on the grid. And you know, that's a good thing for Wyoming. And I think what we at the association and some of our partners, when we're working to advocate for the coal industry, is we want to look at hardening our markets, our existing markets. And part of that is, you know, keeping the existing coal fleet open, kind of staying off some of these premature retirements, and you're seeing that in public policy right now. And you know, continue to keep our coal going to those existing plants. The technology and the development of technology, you can't lose sight of that. It's a little bit concerning, I think. You know, the administration right now is really aggressively and gung-ho. We want to mine more coal, we want to lease more coal, but at the same time, in order to keep your coal viable, you've got to continue to develop that technology. We've got to continue to keep, to crack the carbon capture nut and get it viable, economically viable, so that utilities can use it in order to keep our coal resource viable in the future, because the pendulum swings. I mean, right now we're doing great. But, I'm in the political arena for almost 25 years, and I think I've seen at least 2 or 3 permanent majorities in Washington, D.C., and everyone thinks that when you get in, it's going to be this way forever, and it's not. The pendulum swings back. And I think we've got to be really cautious about that. And, it is a little concerning to see it almost seems like we're taking the foot off the gas on the technology front as far as developing that emissions control technology that is going to keep our coal resource viable into the future. So, we've got to keep doing that, because we could be in a very different situation here in 4 years again, because the pendulum swings and elections have consequences. So I think, and I'll speak a little bit to the coal industry. And again, you talk about hardening those markets. Keep your existing fleet open out of Washington, D.C., some of those incentives to keep your existing power plants open. Oh my gosh, I'm at 5 minutes already, and I've just been rambling. Well, I'll just put it this way. Again, nothing's as good as it seems. Nothing's as bad as it seems. It's an exciting time to be in the mining industry. I don't like to be, I try not to be Pollyannish, but I am the coal industry's chief cheerleader, and it's a fun and exciting time to be in the industry. We've got to lease more coal. We've got about 3.2 billion tons under lease right now, and when you talk about demand, as was one of the previous speakers spoke to, Department of Energy came out with a report in July, projected by the year 2040, demand for electricity could go up between 35 and 50%. We're not producing enough power in this country. And so we've got to really focus on what we're going to do to power our country when you look at the demands of AI, when you look at the demands of data centers, of general electrification, electric vehicles. We're not producing enough power. And I think it's a really interesting thing. We're having the nuclear debate in Wyoming right now, and some of our politicians go, well, we don't want nuclear because it's going to displace our coal. Well, that's nonsense. We need nuclear, we need coal, we need gas, and we need more of all of that in order to power our country into the future. And we've got to keep our eye on the ball on that. With that, I don't know. I just got up here and rambled, but I'm happy. Do I got time for a question? Hey, thank you for having me.
Thank you, Travis. That was great. And I assume you'll be here for break as well if folks want to stop you for some questions. Well, let's convene for a break for the next 15 minutes. And thank you to Holland and Hart for your sponsorship of the break. And we'll come back at 10:45 for our panel on spent nuclear fuel. So see you back at 10:45.